Hello. Hello. You see in front of you a very happy MP because last Friday my private member's bill cleared all its remaining stages in the House of Commons. And for those of you who haven't followed it, it's the Civil Partnerships Marriage and Death Registration Bill. So last Friday the bill went through its report stage and its third reading, as it's called, which means it's now completed all its processes in the House of Commons and will now go on to the House of Lords. That's a really significant step. Now, just to remind you, there are four main areas in my bill, but the most high profile and that which has attracted the most attention is on civil partnerships. And what I've been campaigning on for many years now is to extend civil partnerships, which were brought in back in 2004 for same-sex couples, is to extend that right to opposite-sex couples as well. And we have something like 3.3 million cohabiting opposite-sex couples in this country, many of whom would like to have some form of recognition of their relationship. So originally in my bill, I urged the government to have a review into this situation and to come forward with recommendations for how they could make equal civil partnerships available. Well, a lot has happened since I produced my original bill in July of 2017 because the government has got underway with a review of that situation. But things speeded up hugely when on the 2nd of October the Prime Minister announced that the government have decided that they are going to extend civil partnerships to opposite-sex couples. That was a great announcement. It was certainly spurred on by a ruling by the Supreme Court we had before the summer in the case of a couple who've been campaigning for the last 4 years to have a civil partnership. And the Supreme Court ruled that the government was in contravention of the European Court Convention on Human Rights by not allowing them to have a civil partnership. So it was great that the government have now effectively adopted my policy as government policy. The problem was that they didn't put any timeline on it, and my fear, and that of many in the Equal Civil Partnerships campaign and others, was that this could take several years actually to become law. So what I did last Friday was to add an amendment to my bill, and that amendment said that the government must now bring forward measures to create equal civil partnerships, and it must do it within 6 months of my bill becoming law. So if my bill becomes law before the end of this session, which is likely to be in May or June of next year, effectively that means that civil partnerships will happen in England and Wales before the end of 2019, and that's great news. All we've got to do now is to make sure we get it through the House of Lords, where there are a lot of people who've got various issues and questions and concerns they want to raise on this subject, but we'll now be turning our attention to lobby members of the House of Lords to support this bill. But of course there are three other measures in my bill, and if that part of the bill hadn't gone through on civil partnerships, then the whole bill will have failed, and we've lost these other very well supported measures too. And the first of those was to address the very long-standing anomaly, which most people don't realise, that since 1837 the mothers of couples getting married have not been allowed to add their names and to sign marriage certificates in churches or wherever else it may happen. And that's simply not fair. And we had lots of cases of people who had been brought up by a single parent, by a mum, in many cases because the father had done a runner soon after birth or there had been domestic abuse or whatever, and yet it's the father's name that goes on the wedding certificate rather than the mother's, and that just wasn't fair. My bill addresses that, and that's had a huge amount of support from the government and from MPs from all different parties. So that certainly is going to be a very welcome move when it eventually comes in, when this bill becomes law, hopefully sometime next year. And then there's another area where I've tried to address in this quite complicated, and it's quite a greedy bill, because usually private members' bill are quite difficult to get through with just one subject, and I've got 4 different subjects in my bill. But they're all areas where I think there's an inequality, an unfairness that should have been addressed some time ago. And so the third area is to do with stillbirth. We have alarmingly high rates of stillbirth in the United Kingdom, and the Department for Health has been doing a lot in recent years to try and raise the profile of this issue, and more importantly to make sure there's proper support for those parents who suffer from stillbirth, but even more importantly to be doing a lot more to try and prevent it in the first place. But there are 2 areas where I think actually the law needs to be changed, and the first of those is for those parents who lose a child to stillbirth before 24 weeks. because only at 24 weeks will that stillbirth be registered as a stillbirth and death. Effectively, the state recognised that that child has existed. A child born dead before 24 weeks is just not recognised in law. Now that accounts particularly for stillbirths, of which many mothers have come forward with horrendous cases of how they gave birth after extended times in hospital, going through labour and everything, to tragically a stillborn child, but there's no record of that child having existed. And of course there are many other cases of women who suffer from baby loss earlier on as well. So what my bill does is to oblige the Department of Health to set up a review into how we can change that law. It's not going to be easy. It's fraught with all sorts of problems about should it be all baby loss that's registered, should it be a voluntary scheme, should it be a mandatory scheme, how we deal with the thorny subject of abortion and other terminations as well. But I'm glad to say that before my bill's even gone through, the government has started that work. A review panel has been set up, of which I'm a member, and I hope it will bring forward recommendations. So this bill of mine just confirms that work that's already going on. The fourth area, where again a lot of work has been going on since I put it down in this bill, is allowing coroners to investigate stillbirths. At the moment, as you know, coroners have the power to investigate any deaths under unexplained or suspicious circumstances, any deaths except stillborn babies. And in some cases, there will be questions unanswered and cases that need to be looked in more detail, not least to give some comfort and succour to those parents who've gone through that horrendous experience of having a stillborn child. So my private member's bill will amend the Coroners Act of 2009, allowing coroners to have the power, in those few cases where they think there is further work to be done, to be able to investigate stillbirths and produce a report to find out what happened in that case, and hopefully produce some recommendations for how that hospital or wherever else it happened can take steps in the future to avoid more stillbirths happening. It's a sensible measure to give some form of closure and answers to grieving parents, but also trying to improve the whole system to reduce stillbirths and baby loss as well. And I'm glad to say that some substantial work has been going on by the Department of Justice, who lead on the whole coroners area, and they will be coming forward with a series of recommendations so that if my bill goes through, then those changes can happen quite quickly. So I'm really proud of this bill. There was very widespread support in Parliament from all sides of the House last Friday. It now goes to the Lords, and I'll be working with Baroness Hodgson, who will be leading on the bill in my place in the House of Lords. But again, we'll be working with a wide cross-party consensus of people who support these sensible, fair measures in my bill. And I hope before the end of next year it can become law, that civil partners can be extended to the many opposite-sex couples who I know want to get hitched and for whom, for whatever reason, marriage is not for them, and to make sure we're doing even more to try and cut down on stillbirths, but also give support to those parents who've been through the agony of stillbirths, and also to address this ridiculous long-standing iniquity where mothers can't be recognised on marriage certificates. I hope I've got your support for this, but we'll put the champagne on ice a little longer until we've got the bill through the House of Lords.